Part 8, Section 2 of A Christmas Miscellany, 2019, by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 8, Holiday Tales, Christmas in the Adirondacks, How John Norton the Trapper Kept His Christmas, by William Henry Harrison Murray, Section 2. 3. At the same moment the rifle sounded, two men, the trapper with his pack, and Wild Bill with his sled heavily loaded, were descending the western slope of the mountain, not a mile from the clearing in which stood the lonely cabin. The sound of the piece brought them to a halt as quickly as if the bullet had cut through the air in front of their faces. For several minutes both stood in the attitude of listening. "Down into the snow with ye, pups!" exclaimed the trapper in a hoarse whisper. "Down in the snow with ye, I say! Rover, if you lift your muzzle again, I'll warm ye back with the ramrod. By the Lord, Bill, the buck is coming this way. You can see his horns lift above the leetle balsams as he breaks through the thicket yonder. If he strikes the runway, he'll sartinly come within range." And the old trapper slipped his arms from the pack, and, lowering it to the earth, sank on his knees beside it, where he waited as motionless as if the breath had departed his body. Onward came the game. As the trapper had suggested, the buck, with mighty and far-reaching bounds, cleared the shrubby obstruction, and, entering the runway, tore up the familiar path with the violence of a tornado. Onward he came, his head flung upward, his antlers laid well back, tongue lolling from his mouth, and his nostrils smoking with the hot breaths that burst in streaming columns from them. Not until his swift career had brought him exactly in front of his position did the old man stir a muscle. But then, quick as the motion of the leaping game, his rifle jumped to his cheek, and even as the buck was at the central point of his leap and suspended in the air, the piece cracked sharp and clear, and the deer, stricken to his death, fell with a crash to the ground. The quivering hounds rose to their feet and bayed long and deep. Wild Bill swung his hat and yelled, and for a moment the woods rang with the wild cries of dogs and man. "Lord a massy, Bill, what a mouth you have when you open it!" exclaimed the trapper, as he leisurely poured the powder into the still smoking barrel. "Atween you and the pups, it's enough to drive a man crazy. I should certainly think you'd never seed a deer shot 'fore, by the way you be actin'." "I've seen a good many, as you know, John Norton, but I never saw one tumbled over by a single bullet when at the very top of his jump, as that one was. I certainly thought you had waited too long, and I wouldn't have given a cent for your chances when you pulled. It was a wonderful shot, John Norton, and I would take just such another tramp as I have had to see you do it again, old man." "Oh, it wasn't bad," returned the trapper. "No, it sartinly wasn't bad, for he was a-goin' as if the old Harry was arter him. I shouldn't wonder if he had felt the tetch of lead down there in the holler, and the smart of his hurt kept him flyin'. Let's go and look him over, and see if we can't find the markings of the bullet in him." In a moment the two stood above the dead deer. "It is as I thought," said the trapper, as he pointed with his ramrod to a stain of blood on one of the hams of the buck. "The bullet drove through his thigh here, but it didn't tetch the bone, and was a sheer waste of lead, for it only sawed him going like an arrer. Bill, I certainly doubt," continued the old man, as he measured the noble animal with his eye, "I certainly doubt if I ever seed a bigger deer. There's 7 prongs on his horns, and I'll bet a horn of powder agin a chargeful that he'd weigh 300 pounds as he lies. Lord, what a Christmas gift he'll be for the woman! The skin will make a blanket fit for a queen to sleep under, and the meat judiciously cured for will last her all winter. We must manage to get it to the edge of the clearing, anyhow, or the wolves might make free with our venison, Bill. Your sled is a strong un, and it'll bear the load if you go keerful." The trapper and his companion set themselves to their task with the energy of men accustomed to surmount every obstacle, and in a short half-hour the sled, with its double loading, stopped at the door of the lonely cabin. "I don't understand this, Wild Bill," said the trapper. "Here be a woman's tracks in the snow, and the door be left a leetle ajar, but there's no smoke in the chimney, and they sartinly ain't very noisy inside. I'll just give a knock or two, and see if they be stirring." And, suiting the action to the word, He knocked long and loud on the large door. But to his noisy summons there came no response, and without a moment of farther hesitation he shoved open the door and entered. "God a mercy, Wild Bill!" exclaimed the trapper. "Look in here!" A huge room, dimly lighted, holes in the roof, here and there a heap of snow on the floor, an immense fireplace, with no fire in it, and a group of scared, wild-looking children huddled together in the farther corner, like young and timid animals that had fled in a fright from the nest where they had slept at some fearful intrusion. That is what the trapper saw. Whatever Wild Bill was about to say, his astonishment, and we may add his pity, were too profound for him to complete his ejaculation. "Don't you be afeard, leetle ones," said the trapper, as he advanced into the center of the room to survey more fully the wretched place. "This be Christmas morn, and me and Wild Bill and the pups have come over the mountain to wish you all a Merry Christmas. But where be your mother?" queried the old man, as he looked kindly at the startled group. "We don't know where she is," answered the older of the two girls. "We thought she was in bed with us, till you woke us. We don't know where she has gone." "I have it, Wild Bill!" exclaimed the trapper, whose eyes had been busy scanning the place while talking with the children. "The rifle be gone from the hangings, and the tracks in the snow be hern. Yes, I see it all. She went out in the hope of getting the leetle ones here something to eat, and that was her rifle we heard, and her bullet made that hole in the ham of the buck. What a disappointment to the poor creature when she seed she hadn't hit him. Her heart innermost broke, I dare say. But the Lord was in it. Leastways, he didn't go agin the proper shaping of things arterwards. Come, Bill, let's stir around lively and get the shanty in shape a leetle, and some victuals on the table afore she comes. Yes, get out your axe and slash into that dead beech at the corner of the cabin, while I sorter clean up inside. A fire's the first thing on such a morning as this. So scurry round, Bill, and bring in the wood as if you was a good deal in earnest, and do you cut to the measure of the fireplace, and don't waste your time in shorting it, for the longer the fireplace, the longer the wood. That is, if you want to make it a heater." His companion obeyed with alacrity, and by the time the trapper had cleaned out the snow and swept down the soot from the sides of the fireplace, and put things partially to rights, Bill had stacked the dry logs into the huge opening nearly to the upper jamb, and with the help of some large sheets of birch bark kindled them to a flame. "Come here, little ones," said the trapper, as he turned his good-natured face toward the children. "Come here, and put your leetle feet on the hearthrug, for 'tis warmin', and I can see your toes be about freezin'." It was not in the power of children to withstand the attraction of such an invitation, extended with such a hearty voice and such benevolence of feature. The children came promptly forward, and stood in a row on the great stone, and warmed their little shivering bodies by the abundant flames. "Now, leetle folks," said the trapper, "jist get yourselves well warmed, then get on what clothes you got, and we'll have some breakfast. Yes, we'll have some breakfast ready by the time your mother gets back, for I know where she be gone, and she'll be hungry and cold when she gets in. I don't conceit that this leetle chap here can help much, but ye girls be big enough to help a good deal. So when you be warm, do you put away the bed to the furthest corner, and shove out the table in front of the fire, and put on the dishes, such as you have, and be smart about it, too, for your mother will sartinly be comin' soon, and we must be ahead of her with the cookin'." What a change the next half hour made in the appearance of the cabin! The huge fire sent its heat to the farthest corner of the great room. The miserable bed had been removed out of sight, and the table, drawn up in front of the fire, was set with the needed dishes. On the hearthstone a large platter of venison steak, broiled by the trapper's skill, simmered in the heat. A mighty pile of cakes, brown to a turn, flanked one side, while a stack of potatoes, baked in the ashes, supported the other. The teapot sent forth its refreshing odor through the room. The children, with their faces washed and hair partially, at least, combed, ran about with bare feet on the warm floor, comfortable and happy. To them it was as a beautiful dream. The breakfast was ready, and the visitors sat waiting for the coming of her to whose assistance the angel of Christmas Eve had sent them. "Sh!" whispered the trapper, whose quick ear had caught the sound of a dragging step in the snow. "She's coming!" Too weary and faint, too sick at heart and exhausted in body to observe the unaccustomed signs of human presence around her dwelling, the poor woman dragged herself to the door and opened it. The gun she still held in her hand fell rattling to the floor, and with eyes wildly opened, she gazed bewildered at the spectacle. The blazing fire, the set table, the food on the hearthstone, the smiling children, the two men. She passed her hands across her eyes as one waking from sleep. Was she dreaming? Was this cabin the miserable hut she had left at daybreak? Was that the same fireplace in front of whose cold and cheerless recess she had crouched the night before? And were those two strangers there men, or were they angels? Was what she saw real, or was it only a fevered vision born of her weakness? Her senses actually reeled to and fro, and she trembled for a moment on the verge of unconsciousness. Indeed, the shock was so overwhelming that in another instant she would have swooned and fallen to the floor, had not the growing faintness been checked by the sound of a human voice. "A Merry Christmas to ye, my good woman," said the trapper. "A Merry Christmas to ye and yourn." The woman started as the hearty tones fell on her ear, and steadying herself by the door, she said, speaking as one partially dazed, "Are you John Newton the trapper, or are you an "You needn't sigh it again," interrupted the old man. "Yes, I'm old John Norton himself, nothing better and nothing worse. And the man in the chair here by my side is Wild Bill, and you couldn't make an angel out of him if you tried from now till next Christmas. Yes, my good woman, I'm John Norton, and this is Wild Bill, and we've come over the mountain to wish you a Merry Christmas, ye and your little ones, and help you keep the day. And you see, we've been stirring a little in your absence, and breakfast be waiting. Wild Bill and me will just go out and cut a little more wood while ye warm and wash yourself, and when you be ready to eat, you may call us, and we'll see which can get into the house first." So saying, the trapper, followed by his companion, passed out of the door, while the poor woman, without a word, moved toward the fire, and casting one look at her children, at the table, at the food on the hearthstone, dropped on her knees by a chair, and buried her face in her hands. "I say," said Wild Bill to the trapper, as he crept softly away from the door, to which he had returned to shut it more closely, "I say, John Norton, the woman is on her knees by a chair." "Very likely, returned the old man reverently, and then he began to chop vigorously at a huge log, with his back toward his comrade. Perhaps some of you who read this tale will come sometime, when weary and heartsick, to something drearier than an empty house, some bleak, cold day, some lonely morn, and with a starving heart and benumbed soul. Ay, and empty-handed, too. Enter in only to find it swept and garnished, and what you most needed and longed for waiting for you. Then will you, too, drop upon your knees and cover your face with your hands, ashamed that you had murmured against the hardness of your lot, or forgotten the goodness of him who suffered you to be tried only that you might more fully appreciate the triumph. "My good woman," said the trapper, when the breakfast was eaten, "we've come, as we said, to spend the day with you, and according to custom, and a pleasant un it be for sartin, we've brought you some presents. A good many of 'em come from him who called on ye as he and me passed through the lake last fall. I dare say you remember him, and he sartinly has remembered ye. For last evening, when I was making up a leetle pack to bring ye myself, for I conceited I had better come over and spend the day with you, Wild Bill came to my door with the box on his sled that the boy had sent him from his home in the city. And in the box he had put a great many presents for him and me. And in the lower half of the box he put a good many presents for ye and your little ones. And we brought them all over with us. Some of the things be for eating, and some of 'em be for wearing. And that there may be no misunderstanding, I would say that all the things that be in the back basket there, and all the things that be on the sled, too, belong to you. And as I see the woodpile isn't a very big un for this time of the year, Bill and me be going out to settle our breakfast a leetle with the axes. And while we be gone, I can see you better rummage the things over, and them that be good for eating you better put in the cupboard, and them that be good for wearing you better put on yourself and your leetle ones, and then we'll all be ready to make a fair start. For this be Christmas Day, and we be going to keep it as it oughter be kept. Ef we've had sorrers, we'll forget 'em, and we'll laugh and eat and be merry. For this be Christmas, my good woman. Children, this be Christmas. Wild Bill, my boy, this be Christmas. And Pops, this be Christmas. And we'll all laugh and eat and be merry." The joyfulness of the old man was contagious. His happiness flowed over as waters flow over the rim of a fountain. Wild Bill laughed as he seized his axe, the woman rose from the table smiling, the girls giggled, the little boy stamped, and the hounds, catching the spirit of their merry master, swung their tails round and bayed in canine gladness. And amid the joyful uproar the old trapper spun himself out of the door and chased Wild Bill through the snow like a boy. The dinner was to be served at 2 o'clock, and what a dinner it was, and what preparations preceded! The snow had been shoveled from around the cabin, the holes in the roof roughly but effectually thatched. A good pile of wood was stacked in front of the doorway. The spring that bubbled from the bank had been cleared of ice, and a protection constructed over it. The huge buck had been dressed and hung high above the reach of wolves. Cedar and balsam branches had been placed in the corners and along the sides of the room. Great sprays of the tasseled pine and the feathery tamarack were suspended from the ceiling. The table had been enlarged and extra seats extemporized. The long, unused oven had been cleaned out, and under its vast dome the red flames flashed and rolled upward. What a change a few hours had brought to that lonely cabin and its wretched inmates! The woman, dressed in her new garments, her hair smoothly combed, her face lighted with smiles, looked positively comely. The girls, happy in their fine clothes and marvelous toys, danced round the room, wild with delight, while the little boy strutted about the floor in his new boots, proudly showing them to each person for the 100th time. The hostess's attention was equally divided between the temperature of the oven and the adornment of the table. A snow-white sheet, one of a dozen she had found in the box, was drafted peremptorily into service and did duty as a tablecloth. Oh, the innocent and funny makeshifts of poverty, and the goodly distance it can make a little go! Perhaps some of us, as we stand in our rich dining rooms and gaze with pride at the silver, the gold, the cut glass, and the transparent china, can recall a little kitchen in a homely house far away, where our good mothers once set their tables for their guests, and what a brave show the few extra dishes made when they brought them out on the rare festive days. However it might strike you, fair reader, to the poor woman and her guest there was nothing incongruous in a sheet serving as a tablecloth. Was it not white and clean and properly shaped, and would it not have been a tablecloth if it hadn't been a sheet? How very nice and particular some people can be over the trifling matter of a name! And this sheet had no right to be a sheet, since anyone with half an eye could see at a glance that it was predestined from the first to be a tablecloth, for it sat as smoothly on the wooden surface as pious looks on a deacon's face, while the easy and nonchalant way it draped itself at the corners was perfectly jaunty. The edges of this square of white sheeting that had thus providentially found its true and predestined use were ornamented with the leaves of the wild myrtle stitched on in the form of scallops. In the center, with a brave show of artistic skill, were the words "Merry Christmas," prettily worked with the small brown cones of the pines. This, the joint product of Wild Bill's industry and the woman's taste, commanded the enthusiastic admiration of all, and even the little boy, from the height of a chair into which he had climbed, was profoundly affected by the show it made. The trapper had charge of the meat department, and it is safe to say that no Delmonico could undertake to serve venison in greater variety than did he. To him it was a grand occasion, and, in a culinary sense, he rose grandly to meet it. What bosom is without its little vanities? And shall we laugh at the dear old man because he looked upon the opportunity before him with feeling other than pure benevolence, even of complacency, that what he was doing was being done as no one else could do it? There was venison roasted, and venison broiled, and venison fried. There was hashed venison and venison spitted. There was a side dish of venison sausage, strong with the odor of sage, and slightly dashed with wild thyme, and a huge kettle of soup, on whose rich, creamy surface pieces of bread and here and there a slice of potato floated. "I tell you, Bill," said the trapper to his companion, as he stirred the soup with the long ladle, "this pot isn't actually running over with taters, but you can see a bit occasionally if you look sharp and keep the ladle going round pretty lively. No, the taters ain't over plenty," continued the old man, peering into the pot and sinking his voice to a whisper, "but there wasn't but 15 in the bag, and the woman took 12 of 'em for her kittle, and you can't make 3 taters look actually crowded in 2 gallons of soup, can you, Bill?" And the old man punched that personage in the ribs with the thumb of the hand that was free from service, while he kept the ladle going with the other. "Lord!" exclaimed the trapper, speaking to Bill, who, having taken a look into the old man's kettle, was digging his knuckles into his eyes to free them from the spray that was jetted into them from the fountains of mirth within that were now in full play. "Lord, if there ain't another piece of tater gone all to pieces! Bill, if I make another circle with the ladle, there won't be a whole slice left, and you'll swear there wasn't a tater in the soup." And the 2 men, with their faces within 20 inches, laughed and laughed like boys. How sweet it is to think that when the Maker set up this strange instrument we call ourselves, and strung it for service, he selected of the heavy chords so few, and of the lighter ones so many. Some muffled ones there are, some slow and solemn sounds swell sadly forth at intervals, but blessed be God that we are so easily tickled, and the world is so funny that within it, even when exiled from home and friends, we find, as the days come and go, the causes and occasions of hilarity. Wild Bill had been placed in charge of the liquids. What a satire there is in circumstances, and how those of to-day laugh at those of yesterday! Yes, Wild Bill had charge of the liquids, no mean charge when the occasion is considered. Nor was the position without its embarrassments, as few honorable positions are, for it brought him face to face with the problem of the day dishes. For between the 2 cooks of the occasion, every dish in the cabin had been brought into requisition, and poor Bill was left in the predicament of having to make tea and coffee, with no pots to make them in. But Bill was not lacking in wit, if he was in pots, and he solved the conundrum how to make tea without a teapot in a manner that extorted the woman's laughter and commanded the old trapper's admiration. In ransacking the lofts above the apartment, he had lighted on several large stone jugs, which, with the courage, shall we call it the audacity, of genius, he had seized upon; and having thoroughly rinsed them and freed them from certain odors, with which we are free to say Bill was more or less familiar, he brought them forward as substitutes for kettle and pot. Indeed, they worked admirably, for in them the berry and the leaves might not only be properly steeped, but the flavor could be retained beyond what it might in many of our famous and high-sounding patented articles. But Bill, while ingenious and courageous to the last degree, was lacking in education, especially in scientific directions. He had never been made acquainted with that great promoter of modern civilization, the expansive properties of steam. The corks he had whittled out for his bravely extemporized tea and coffee pots were of the closest fit, and, as they had been inserted with the energy of a man who, having conquered a serious difficulty, is determined to reap the full benefit of his triumph, there was at least no danger that the flavor of the concoctions would escape through any leakage at the muzzle. Having thus prepared them for steeping, he placed the jugs in his corner of the fireplace, and pushed them well up through the ashes to the live coals. "Wal, Bill," said the trapper, who wished to give his companion the needed warning in as delicate and easy a manner as possible, "wal, Bill, you've sartinly got the right idea techin' the makin' of tea and coffee, for the yarb should be steeped, and the berry, too, leastwise arter it's biled up once or twice, and therefore it be only reasonable that the nozzle should be closed moderately tight. But a man wants considerable experience in the business, or he's likely to overdo it just a leetle, and if you don't cut some slots in them wooden corks, you're driving them into nozzles. Bill, there'll be a good deal of tea and coffee floating round in your corner of the fireplace afore many minutes, and I can see there'll be a man about your size looking for a couple of corks and pieces of jugs out there in the clearing, too." "Do you think so?" answered Bill incredulously. "Don't you be scared, old man, but keep on stirring your soup and turning the meat, and I'll keep my eye on the bottles." "That's right, Bill," returned the trapper. "You keep your eye right on 'em, especially on that 'un that's furthest in toward the butt of the beech log there, for if there's any virtue in signs, that jug be getting uneasy." "Yes," continued the old man, after a minute's pause, during which his eye hadn't left the jug, "yes, that jug will want more room for many minutes, if I'm any jedge, and I conceit I'd better give it the biggest part of the fireplace." And the trapper hastily moved the soup and his half-dozen plates of cooked meats to the other end of the hearthstone, whither he retired himself, like one who, feeling that he is called upon to contend with unknown forces, wisely beats a retreat. He even put himself behind a stack of wood that lay piled up in his corner, like one who does not despise, in a sudden emergency, an artificial protection. "Bill," called the trapper, "edge around a leetle, edge round and get in closer to the jam. It's sheer foolishness standing where you be, for the water will be walloping in a minute, and if the corks be swelled in the nozzle, there'll be an explosion. Get in toward the jam, and watch the ambushment under kiver." "Old man," answered Bill, as he turned his back carelessly toward the fireplace, "I've got the bearings of this trail, and I know what I'm about. The jugs are as strong as iron kittles, and I ain't afraid of their bust—" Bill never finished the sentence, for the explosion predicted by the trapper occurred. It was a tremendous one, and the huge fireplace was filled with flying brands, ashes, and clouds of steam. The trapper ducked his head, the woman screamed, and the hounds rushed howling to the farthest end of the room, while Bill, with half a somersault, disappeared under the table. "Hurrah!" shouted the trapper, lifting his head from behind the wood, and critically surveying the scene. "Hurrah, Bill!" he shouted, as he swung the ladle over his head. "Come out from under the table and man your battery again. Your old mortars was loaded to the muzzle, and if you had depressed the pieces a little, you'd have blowed the cabin to splinters. As it was, the chimney got the biggest part of the charging, and you'll find your rammers on the other side of the mountain." It was, in truth, a scene of uproarious hilarity, for once the explosion was over, and the women and children saw there was no danger, and apprehended the character of the performance, they joined unrestrainedly in the trapper's laughter, in which they were assisted by Wild Bill, as if he were not the victim of his own overconfidence. "I say, old trapper," he called from under the table, "did both guns go off? I was getting under cover when the battery opened, and didn't notice whether the firing was in sections or along the whole line. If there's a piece left, I think I will stay where I am, for I am in good position to observe the range and watch the effect of the shot. I say, hadn't you better get behind the woodpile again?" "No, no," interrupted the trapper. "The whole battery went at the word, Bill, and there isn't a gun or a gun carriage left in the casement. You've wasted a gill of the yarb and a quarter of a pound of the berry, and you must hurry up with another outfit of bottles, or we'll have nothing but water to drink at the dinner." The dinner! That great event of the day, the crown and diadem to its royalty, and which became it so well, was ready promptly to the hour. The table, enlarged as it was to nearly double its original dimensions, could scarcely accommodate the abundance of the feast. Ah, if some sweet power could only enlarge our hearts, when on festive days we enlarge our tables, how many of the world's poor, that now go hungry while we feast, would then be fed? At one end of the table sat the trapper, Wild Bill at the other. The woman's chair was at the center of one of the sides, so that she sat facing the fire, whose generous flames might well symbolize the abundance which amid cold and hunger had so suddenly come to her. On her right hand the two girls sat, on her left the boy. A goodly table, a goodly fire, and a goodly company. What more could the angel of Christmas ask to see? Thus were they seated, ready to begin the repast. But the plates remained untouched, and the happy noises which had to that moment filled the cabin ceased, for the angel of silence, with noiseless step, had suddenly entered the room. There's a silence of grief, there's a silence of hatred, there's a silence of dread. Of these men may speak, and these they can describe. But the silence of our happiness, who can describe that? When the heart is full, when the longing is suddenly met, when love gives to love abundantly, when the soul lacketh nothing and is content, then language is useless, and the angel of silence becomes our only adequate interpreter. A humble table, surely, and humble folk around it. But not in the houses of the rich or the palaces of kings does gratitude find her only home, but in more lowly abodes and with lowly folk, ay, and often at the scant table too, she sitteth a perpetual guest. Was it memory? Did the trapper at that brief moment visit his absent friend? Did Wild Bill recall his wayward past? Were the thoughts of the woman busy with sweet scenes of earlier days? And did memory, by thus reminding them of the absent and the past, of the sweet things that had been and were, stir within their hearts thoughts of him from whom all gifts descend, and of his blessed Son, in whose honor the day was named? O memory, thou tuneful bell that ringeth on forever, friend at our feasts, and friend too, let us call thee, at our burial, what music can equal thine? For in thy mystic globe all tunes abide, the birthday note for kings, the marriage peal, the funeral knell, the gleeful jingle of merry mirth, and those sweet chimes that float our thoughts like fragrant ships upon a fragrant sea toward heaven. All are thine. Ring on, thou tuneful bell, ring on, while these glad ears may drink thy melody, and when thy chimes are heard by me no more, ring aloud and clear above my grave that peal which echoes to the heavens and tells the world of immortality, that they who come to mourn may check their tears and say, "Why do we weep? He liveth still." "The Lord be praised for his goodness," said the trapper, whose thoughts unconsciously broke into speech. "The Lord be praised for his goodness, and make us grateful for his past marcies, and the plenty that be here." And looking down upon the viands spread before him, he added, "The Lord be good to the boy, and make him as happy in his city home as they who be wearing and eating his gifts in the woods." "Amen," said the woman softly, and a grateful tear fell on her plate. "Ahem," said Wild Bill, and then looking down upon his warm suit, he lifted his voice, and bringing it out in a clear, strong tone, said, "Amen, hit or miss." At many a table that day more formal grace was said, by priest and layman alike, and at many a table, by lips of old and young, response was given to the benediction. But we doubt if over all the earth a more honest grace was said, or more honestly assented to, than the Lord heard from the cabin in the woods. The feast and the merrymaking now began. The old trapper was in his best mood, and fairly bubbled over with humor. The wit of Wild Bill was naturally keen, and it flashed at its best as he ate. The children stuffed and laughed as only children on such an elastic occasion can. and as for the poor woman, it was impossible for her, in the midst of such a scene, to be otherwise than happy, and she joined modestly in the conversation, and laughed heartily at the witty sallies. But why should we strive to put on paper the wise, the funny, and the pleasant things that were said, the exclamation, the laughter, the story, the joke, the verbal thrust and parry of such an occasion? These, springing from the centre of the circumstance, and flashed into being at the instant, cannot be preserved for after rehearsal. Like the effervescence of champagne, they jet and are gone. Their force passes away with the noise that accompanied its outcoming. Is it not enough to record that the dinner was a success, that the trapper's meats were put upon the table in a manner worthy of his reputation, that the woman's efforts at pastry making were generously applauded, and that Wild Bill's tea and coffee were pronounced by the hostess the best she had ever tasted? Perhaps no meal was ever more enjoyed, as certainly none was ever more heartily eaten. The wonder and pride of the table was the pudding, a creation of Indian meal, flour, suet, and raisins, reinforced and assisted by innumerable spicy elements supposed to be too mysterious to be grasped by the masculine mind. In the production of this wonderful centerpiece, for it had been unanimously voted the place of honor, the poor woman had summoned all the latent resources of her skill, and in reference to it her pride and fear contended, while the anxiety with which she rose to serve it was only too plainly depicted on her countenance. What if it should prove a failure? What if she had made a miscalculation as to the amount of suet required? A point upon which she had been somewhat confused. What if the raisins were not sufficiently distributed? What if it wasn't done through, and should turn out pasty? Great heavens! The last thought was of so overwhelming a character that no feminine courage could encounter it. Who may describe the look with which she watched the trapper as he tasted it, or the expression of relief which brightened her anxious face when he pronounced warmly in its favor? "It's a wonderful bit of cooking," he said, addressing himself to Wild Bill, "and I certainly doubt if there be anything in the settlements today that can equal it. There be just enough of the suet, and there be a plum for every mouthful, and it's solid enough to stay in the mouth until you've had time to chew it and get a taste of the corn, and I wouldn't give a cent for a pudding if it gets away from your teeth fast. Yes, it be a wonderful bit of cooking," and turning to the woman, he added, "you'll be well proud of it." What higher praise could be bestowed? And as it was re-echoed by all present, and plate after plate was passed for a second filling, the dinner came to an end with the greatest good feeling and hilarity. 4. "Now for the sled," exclaimed the trapper as he rose from the table. "It be a good many years since I've straddled one, but nothing settles a dinner quicker or suits the leetle folks better. I conceit the crust be thick enough to bear us up, and if it is, we can fetch a course from the upper edge of the clearing 50 rods into the lake. Come, children, get on your mittens and your tippets, and hist along to the big pine, and you shall have some fun you won't forget until your heads be wider than mine." It is needless to record that the children hailed with delight the proposition of the trapper, or that they were at the appointed spot long before the speaker and his companion reached it with the sled. "Wild Bill," said the trapper, as they stood on the crest of the slope down which they were to glide, "the crust be smooth as glass, and the hill be a steep un. I certainly doubt if mortal man ever rode faster than this sled'll be going by the time it gets to where the bank pitches into the lake. And if you should get a leetle careless in your steering, Bill, and hit a stump, I conceit that nothing but the help of the Lord, or the rottenness of the stump, could save you from eternity." Now Wild Bill was blessed with a sanguine temperament. To him no obstacle seemed serious, if bravely faced. Indeed, his natural confidence in himself bordered on recklessness, to which the drinking habits of his life had perhaps contributed. When the trapper had finished speaking, Bill ran his eye carelessly down the steep hillside, smooth and shiny as polished steel, and said, "Oh, this isn't anything extry for a hill. I've steered a good many steeper ones, and in nights when the moon was at the half, and the sled overloaded at that. It don't make any difference how fast you go," he added, "if you only keep in the path and don't hit anything." "That's it," replied the trapper. "But the trouble here be to keep in the path, for in the first place there isn't any path, and the stumps be pretty thick, and I doubt if you can line a trail from here to the bank by the lake without one or more sudden twists in it, and a twist in the trail, going as fast as we'll be going, has got to be taken judiciously, or something will happen. I say, Bill, what p'int will you steer for?" Wild Bill, thus addressed, proceeded to give his opinion touching the proper direction of the flight they were to make. Indeed, he had been closely examining the ground while the trapper was speaking, and therefore gave his opinion promptly and with confidence. "You've chosen the course with judgment," said the old man approvingly, after he had studied the line his companion pointed out critically for a moment. "Yes, Bill, you have a natural eye for the business, and I certainly have more confidence in you than I had a minute ago when you was talking about a steeper hill than this, for this hill drops mighty sudden in the pitches, and the crust be smooth as ice, and the sled'll go like a streak when it gets started. But the course you've pointed out be a good un, for there be only one bad turn in it, and good steering orter put a sled around that. I say," continued the old man, turning toward his companion, and pointing out the crook in the course at the bottom of the second dip, "can you swing around that big stump there without upsetting when you come to it?" "Swing around? Of course I can," retorted Bill positively. "There's plenty of room to the left, and—" "Aye, there be plenty of room, as you say, if you don't take too much of it," interrupted the trapper. "But I tell you," broke in the other, "I'll turn my back to no man in steering a sled, and I can put this sled, and you on it, around that stump 100 times, and never lift a runner." "Well, well," responded the trapper, "have it your way. I dare say you be good at steering, and I certainly know I'm good at riding, and I can ride as fast as you can steer if you hit every stump in the clearing. Now, children," continued the old man, turning to the little group, "we be going to try the course, and if the crust holds up, and Wild Bill keeps clear of the stumps, and nothing unusual happens, you shall have all the sliding you want afore you go in. Come, Bill, get your sled pinted right, and I'll be getting on, and we'll see if you can steer an old man round a stump as handily as you say you can." The directions of the trapper were promptly obeyed, and in an instant the sled was in the right position, and the trapper proceeded to seat himself with the carefulness of one who feels he is embarking on a somewhat uncertain venture, and has grave misgivings as to what will be the upshot of the undertaking. The sled was large and strongly built, and it added not a little to his comfort to feel that he could put entire confidence in the structure beneath them. "The sled'll hold," he said to himself, "ef the loadin' goes to the jetchment." The trapper was no sooner seated than Wild Bill threw himself upon the sled, with one leg under him and the other stretched at full length behind. This was a method of steering that had come into vogue since the trapper's boyhood, for in his day the steersman sat astride the sled, with his feet thrust forward, and steered by the pressure of either heel upon the snow. "Hold on, Bill!" exclaimed the trapper, whose eye this novel method of steering had not escaped. "Hold on! Now, hold up a minute! Heavens and arth! You don't mean to steer this sled with one toe, do you? And that, too, the length of a rifle barrel astarn? Wheel around and spread your legs out as you orter, and steer this sled in an honest fashion, or there'll be trouble aboard afore you get to the bottom." "Sit around!" retorted Bill. "How could I see to steer if I was sitting right back of you? For you're nigh a foot taller than I be, and your shoulders are as broad as the sled." "Your p'ints be well taken for sartain," replied the trapper, "for it be no more than reasonable that the man that steers should see where he be going, and I am as anxious as ye be that ye should. Yes, I certainly want you to see where we be going on this trip anyhow, for the crew be a fresh un, and the channel be a leetle crooked, but be ye sartain, Bill, that you can stretch round that stump there as it orter be did, with nothing but your toe out behind? It may be the best way, as you say, but it don't look like honest steerin' to a man of my years." "I have used both ways," answered Bill, "and I give you my word, old man, that this is the best one. You can get a big swing with your foot stretched out in this fashion, and the sled feels the least pressure of the toe. Yes, it's all right. John Norton, are you ready?" "Yes, as ready as I ever shall be," answered the trapper, in a voice in which doubt and resignation were equally mingled. "It may be as you say," he continued, "but the rudder be too fur behind to suit me, and if anything happens on this cruise, just remember, Wild Bill, that my judgment—" The sentence the trapper was uttering was abruptly cut short at this point, for Bill had started the sled with a sudden push, and leaped to his seat behind the trapper, as it glided downward and away. In an instant the sled was under full headway, for the dip was a sharp one, and the crust smooth as ice. Scarce had it gone 10 rods from the point where it started before it was in full flight, and was gliding downward with what would have been, to any but a man of the steadiest nerve, a frightful velocity. But the trapper was of too cool and courageous temperament to be disturbed even by actual danger. Indeed, the swiftness of their downward career, as the sled with a buzz and a roar swept along over the resounding crust, stirred the old man's blood with a tingle of excitement, while the splendid manner with which Wild Bill was keeping it to the course settled upon filled him with admiration, and was fast making him a convert to the new method of steering. Downward they flashed. The trapper's cap had been blown from his head, and as the old man sat bolt upright on his sled, his feet bravely planted on the ground, his face flushed and his white hair streaming, he looked the very picture of hearty enjoyment. Above his head, the face of Wild Bill looked actually sharpened by the pressure of the air on either cheek as it clove through it. But his lips were bravely set, and his eyes were fastened without winking on the big stump ahead, toward which they were rushing. It was at this point that Wild Bill vindicated his ability as a steersman, and at the same time barely escaped shipwreck. At the proper moment he swept his foot to the left, and the sled, in obedience to the pressure, swooped in that direction. But in his anxiety to give the stump a wide berth, Bill overdid the pressure that was needed a trifle, for in calculating the curve required he had failed to allow for the sidewise motion of the sled, and instead of hitting one stump, it looked for an instant as if he would be precipitated among a dozen. "Heave your stern up, Wild Bill! Up with your starn, I say!" yelled the trapper, "or there won't be a stump left in the clearin'." With a quickness and courage that would have done credit to any steersman, for the speed at which they were going was terrific, Bill swept his foot to the right, leaning his body well over at the same instant. The trapper instinctively seconded his endeavors, and with hands that gripped either side of the sled, he hung over that side which was upon the point of going into the air. For several rods the sled glided along on a single runner, and then, righting itself with a lurch, jumped the summit of the last dip, and raced away, like a swallow in full flight, toward the lake. Now, at the edge of the clearing that bounded the shore was a bank of considerable size. Shrubs and stunted bushes fringed the crest of it. These had been buried beneath the snow, and the crust had formed smoothly over them, and as it was upheld by no stronger support than such as the hidden shrubbery furnished, it was incapable of sustaining any considerable pressure. Certainly no sled was ever moving faster than was Wild Bill's when it came to this point, and certainly no sled ever stopped quicker, for the treacherous crust dropped suddenly under it, and the sled was left with nothing but the hind part of one of the runners sticking up in sight. But though the sled was suddenly checked in its career, the trapper and Wild Bill continued their flight. The former slid from the sled without meeting any obstruction, and with the same velocity with which he had been moving. Indeed, so little was his position changed that one might almost fancy that no accident had happened, and that the old man was gliding forward to the end of the course with an adequate structure under him. But with the latter it was far different. For, as the sled stopped, he was projected sharply upward into the air, and after turning several somersaults, he actually landed in front of the trapper, and glided along on the slippery surface ahead of him. And so the two men shot onward, one after the other, while the children cackled from the hilltop, and the woman swung her bonnet over her head and laughed from her position in the doorway. "Bill," called the trapper, when by dint of much effort they had managed to check their motion somewhat, "Bill, if the cruise be over, I concede we'd better anchor hereabouts, but I shipped for the voyage, and ye be captain, and as you've finally got the right way to steer, I feel pretty safe touching the future." It was not until they had come to a full stop and looked around them that they realized the distance they had come, for they had, in truth, slid nearly across the bay. "I've boated a good many times on these waters and under circumstances that called for earnest motion, but I certainly never went across this bay as fast as I did it today. How'd you feel, Bill? How do you feel?" "Well, a good deal shaken up," was the answer. "A good deal shaken up." "I concede as much," answered the trapper. "I concede as much, for you left the sled with mighty little deliberation, and when I saw your legs coming through the air, I certainly doubted if the ice would hold you. But you steered with judgment. Yes, you steered with judgment, Bill, and I'd have said it if we'd gone to the bottom." The sun was already set when they returned to the cabin, for, selecting a safer course, they had given the children an hour's happy sliding. The woman had prepared some fresh tea and a lunch, which they ate with lessened appetites, but with humor that never flagged. When it was ended, the old trapper rose to depart, and, with a dignity and tenderness peculiarly his own, thus spoke. "My good woman," he said, "the moon will soon be up, and the time has come for me to be going. I've had a happy day with ye and the leetle ones, and the trail over the mountain will seem shorter as the pups and me go home, thinking on it. While Bill will stay a few days and put things a little more to rights, and get up a wood pile that will keep you from chopping for a good while. It's his own thought, and you can thank him accordingly." Then, having kissed each of the children and spoken a few words to Wild Bill, he took the woman's hand and said, "The sorrers of life be many, but the Lord never forgets. I've lived until my head be whitening, and I've noted that though he moves slowly, he fetches most things round about the time we need 'em, and the things that be late in coming, I conceit we shall get somewhere furder on. You didn't kill the big buck this morning, but the meat you needed hangs in your door nevertheless." And, shaking the woman heartily by the hand, he whistled to the hounds and passed out of the door. The inmates of the cabin stood and watched him, until, having climbed the slope of the clearing, he disappeared in the shadows of the forest, and then they closed the door. But more than once Wild Bill noted that as the woman stood wiping her dishes, she wiped her eyes as well, and more than once he heard her say softly to herself, "God bless the dear old man." "Aye, aye, poor woman, we join thee in thy prayer. God bless the dear old man. And not only him, but all who do the deeds he did. God bless them, all and one." Over the crusted snow the trapper held his course, until he came, with a happy heart, to his cabin. Soon a fire was burning on his own hearthstone, and the hounds were in their accustomed place. He drew the table in front, where the fire's fine light fell on his work, and, taking some green vines and branches from the basket, began to twine a wreath. One he twined, and then he began another, and often as he twined the fadeless branches in, he paused, and long and lovingly looked at the two pictures hanging on the wall. And when the wreaths were twined, he hung them on the frames, and, standing in front of the dumb reminders of his absent ones, he said, "I miss them so." Ah, friend, dear friend, when life's glad day with you and me is past, when the sweet Christmas chimes are rung for other ears than ours, when the other hands set the green branches up, and other feet glide down the polished floor, may there be those still left behind to twine us wreaths and say, "We miss them so." And this is the way John Norton the Trapper kept his Christmas. End of Part 8, Section 2. Part 9 of A Christmas Miscellany, 2019, by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 9, Holiday Tales, Christmas in the Adirondacks, John Norton's Vagabond, by William Henry Harrison Murray, Section 1. 1. A cabin in the woods. Of it I have written before, and of it I write again. The same great fireplace piled high with logs fiercely ablaze. Again, on either side of the fireplace are the hounds gazing meditatively into the fire. The same big table, and on it the same great book, leather-bound and worn by the hands of many generations. And at the strong table, bending over the sacred book, with one huge finger marking a sentence, the same whitened head, the same man, large of limb and large of feature, John Norton, the Trapper. "Yes, pups," said the trapper, speaking to his dogs as one speaks to companions in council. "Yes, pups, must go in, for here it be writ in the book. Rover, you needn't have that detarmined look in your eye, for here it be writ in the book, I say, do unto others as you would that others should do unto you. I know, old dog, that ye have seed me line the sights on the vagabonds, when ye and me have catched 'em pilfering the traps or tampering with the line, and I have trusted your nose as often as my own eyes in tracking the knaves when they've got the start of us. And I will admit it, Rover, that the Lord gave you a great gift in your nose, so that you be able to discern the difference atween the scent of an honest trapper's moccasin and that of a vagabond. But that isn't the p'int, Rover. The p'int is, Christmas be a-comin', and ye and me and Sport yonder have sot it down that we're to have a dinner, and the question in council tonight is, who shall we invite to our dinner? Here we have been arguing the matter 3 nights atween us, pups, and we didn't get a foot ahead, and the reason that we didn't get a foot ahead was because ye and me, Rover, naturally felt alike, for we have never consorted with vagabonds, and we couldn't bear the idea of inviting 'em to this cabin and eating with 'em. So ye and me agreed tonight we'd go to the book and go by the book, hit or miss. And the reason we should go to the book and buy the book is because if it wasn't for the book there wouldn't be any Christmas, nor any Christmas dinner to invite anyone to. And so we went to the book, and the book says, I will read you the words, Rover, and Sport, though ye be a younger dog, and naturally of less judgment, yet ye have your gifts, and I have seed ye straighten out a trail that Rover and me couldn't untangle. So do ye listen, both of ye, like honest dogs, while I read the words. Give to him that lacketh, and from him that hath not, withhold not thine hand. There it be, Rover, we are to give to the man that lacks, vagabond or no vagabond. If he lacks victuals, we are to give him victuals, and if he lacks garments, we are to give him garments. If he lacks a Christmas dinner, Rover, we are to give him a Christmas dinner. But how are we to give him a Christmas dinner unless we give him an invite to it? For you know yourself, Rover, that no vagabond would ever come to a cabin where ye and me be, unless we asked him to. But there's another sentence here somewhere in the book that bears on the point we be considering. When thou makest a dinner, that be exactly our case, Rover, or a supper, call not thy friends nor thy brethren, and neither thy kinsmen nor thy rich neighbours, lest they also bid thee again, and a recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and thou shalt be blessed. For they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. Furthermore, Rover, there's another passage that the lad, when he was on the arth, used to say each night afore he went to sleep, whether in the cabin or on the boughs. Sport, you must remember it, for you was his own dog. I am not sartain where it be writ in the book, but that doesn't matter, for we all know the words. It be from the great prayer. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And the great prayer, as I conceit, is the only blazon a man can trail by if he hopes to fetch through to the great clearin' in peace. Now, these vagabonds, Rover, I needn't name 'em to you, have trespassed agin us. Ye and me know it, for we've catched 'em in their devilment, and what is more to the p'int, the Lord knows it too, for he's had his eye on 'em, and there's one up in the north country that wouldn't get an invite to this dinner, Bible or no Bible. But barrin' this knave, who is beyond the range of our trails, there is not a single vagabond that has trespassed agin us that we mustn't forgive. For this be Christmas time, pups, and Christmas be a time for forgivin' and forgettin' all the evil that's been done agin us." And here the old man paused and looked at the dogs, and then gazed long and earnestly into the fire. To his face as he gazed came the look of satisfaction and a most placid peace. It was evident that if there had been a struggle between his natural feelings and his determination to celebrate the great Christmas festival in the true Christmas spirit, the latter had won, and that the Christmas mood had at last entered into and possessed his soul. And after an interval he rose and, carefully closing the great volume, said, "And now, pups, as we've settled it atween us, and we all stand agreed in the matter, I'll get the bark and the coal, and we'll see how the decision of the council looks when it be put in writing." And in a moment the trapper was again seated at the table, with a large piece of birch bark in front of him, and a hound on either side. "I conceit, pups, that the letterin'," said the old man, as he proceeded to sharpen the piece of charcoal he held in his hands, "should be a goodly size, for it may help some in readin', and I sartinly know it will help me in writin'." With this honest confession of his lack of practice in penmanship, he proceeded to write: "Any man or animal that be in want of victuals or garments is invited to come on Christmas Day, which be next week Thursday, without furder axin, to John Norton's cabin on Long Lake to eat Christmas dinner, vagabonds included in this invite." "I can't say," said the trapper, as he backed off a few paces and looked at the writing critically, "I can't say that the wordin' be exactly as the missioners would put it, and as for the spellin', I haven't got any more confidence in it than a rifle that loads at the breech pin. The letterin' sartinly stands out well, for the coal is a good un, and I put as much weight on it as I thought it would bear. But there is sartinly a good deal of difference atween the ups and downs of the markings, and the lines slope off toward the northwest, as if they had started out to blaze a trail through to St. Regis. That third line looks as if it would finally come together if you'd gi'n it time enough to get around the circle. But the bark had a curve in it there, and the coal followed the grain of the bark, and I'm not to blame for that. Rover, I more than half conceit by the look in your eye that you see the difference in the size of them letters yourself. But if you do, you be a wise dog to keep your face steady, for if you showed your feelin's, old as you be, I'd edicate you with the help of a moccasin." And he looked at the old dog, whose face, as if he realized the peril of his position, bore an expression of supernatural gravity, with interrogative earnestness. "Never mind the shape and size of the letters or the curve of the lines," he added. "The charcoal markin' stands out strong, and any hungry man with a leaky cabin for his home can sartinly study out the words, and that's the chief p'int, as I understand it." With this comforting reflection, the trapper made his preparations to retire for the night. He placed the skins for the dogs in the accustomed spot, lifted another huge log into the monstrous fireplace, swept the great hearthstone, bolted the heavy door, and then stretched himself upon his bed. But before he slept, he gazed long and earnestly at the writing on the bark, and murmured, "Vagabonds included in this invite? Yes, the book be right. Christmas be a day for forgivin' and forgettin', and even a vagabond, if he needs victuals or garments or a right spirit, shall be welcome to my cabin." And then he slept. In the vast and cheerless woods that night there were some who were hungry and cold and wicked. What were Christmas and its cheer to them? what were gifts and giving, or who would spread for them a full table at which, as guests of honor, they might eat and be merry. And above the woods was a star leading men toward a manger, and a multitude of angels, and an eye that seeth forever the hungry and the cold and the wicked. On his bed slept the trapper, with the look of the Christ on his face, and as he slept he murmured, "Yes, the book be right. Let him who hath give to him that hath not." And above the woods, above the wicked and the cold, above the sleeping trapper, and above the blessed words on the bark on his wall, above the spot where the Christ had thus received a forest incarnation, a great multitude of the heavenly host broke forth and sang, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill towards men." 2. It was on the day before Christmas, and the sun was at its meridian. It was a day of brilliance and prophecy, and the prophecy which the trapper read in the intense sky and vivid brightness of the sun's light told him of coming storm. "Yes," muttered the old man, as he stood just outside the doorway of his cabin and carefully studied the signs of forest and sky. "Yes, this is a weather breeder for certain. I smell it in the air. The light is unnaturally bright, and the woods unnaturally still. Snow be a-flying afore another sunrise, and the woods will roar like the Great Lakes in a gale. I'm sorry that it's coming, for some will be kept from the dinner. It's sartinly strange that the ordering of the Lord is as it is, for a little more hurrying and a leetle more staying on his part of the things that happen on the earth would make mortals a good deal happier, as I conceit. Aye, John Norton, a little more hurrying and a little more staying of things that happen on the earth would make mortals much happier. The great ship that is today a wreck would be sailing the sea, and the faces that stare ghastly white from its depths would be rosy with life's happy health. The flowers on her tomb would be twined in the bride's glossy hair, and the tower that now stands half builded would go on to its finishing. The dry fountain would still be in play, and the leafless tree would stand green in its beauty and bloom. Who shall read us the riddle of the ordering in this world? Who shall read the riddle, O man of whitened head, O woman whose life is but a memory? Who shall read us the trapper's riddle, I say? "There comes Wild Bill," exclaimed the trapper joyfully, "and one plate will have its eater for sartin." And the old man laughed at the recollection of his companion's appetite. "Lord a mercy, that box on his sled is as big as the ark. I wonder if he's not a drove of animals in it." Had the trapper known the closeness of his guess as to the contents of the huge box, he would have marveled at his guessing, for there certainly were animals in the box, and of a sort that usually are noisy enough and sure, at the least provocation, to proclaim their name and nature. But every animal, whether wild or domesticated, has its habits, and many of the noisiest of mouths, when the mood is on them, can be as dumb as a sphinx. And as Wild Bill came shuffling up on his snowshoes with a box of goodly size lashed to his sled, not a sound proceeded therefrom. It is needless to record that the greeting between the two men was most hearty. How delightful is the meeting of men of the woods! Manly are they in life, and manly in their greeting. "What have you got in the box, Bill?" queried the trapper good-naturedly. "It's big enough to hold a church bell and a good part of the steeple beside." "It's a Christmas present for you, John Norton," replied Bill gleefully. "You don't think I will come to your cabin today and not bring a present, do you?" "Gift or no gift, your welcome would be the same," answered the trapper, "for your heart and your shooting be both right, and you will find the door of my cabin open at your coming, whether you come full-handed or empty, sober or drunk, Wild Bill." "I haven't touched a drop for 12 months," responded the other. "The pledge I gave you above the Christmas box in your cabin here last Christmas Eve I have kept, and shall keep to the end, John Norton." "I expected it of ye. Yes, I certainly expected it of ye, Bill, for ye came of good stock. Your granther fit in the Revolution, and a man's word gets its value a good deal from his breeding, as I conceit," replied the trapper. But what have you in the box? Bird, beast, or fish, Bill?" "The trail runs this way," answered Bill. "I chopped a whole winter 4 years ago for a man who never paid me a cent for my work at the end of it. Last week I concluded to go and collect the bill myself, but not a thing could I get out of the knave but what's in the box. So I told him I'd take them and call the account settled, for I had read the writing on the bark you had nailed up on Indian Carry, and I said, 'They will help out at the dinner.'" And Bill proceeded to start one of the boards with his hatchet. The trapper, whose curiosity was now thoroughly excited, applied his eye to the opening, and as he did so, there suddenly issued from the box the most unearthly noises, accompanied by such scratchings and clawings as could only have proceeded from animals of their nature under such extraordinary treatment as they had experienced. "Heavens and earth!" exclaimed the trapper. "You have pigs in that box, Bill." "That's what I put in it," replied Bill, as he gave it another whack, "and that's what will come out of it if I start the clinchins of these nails," and he bent himself with energy to do his work. Hold up, Bill," cried the trapper. "This isn't a bit of business you can do in a hurry if you expect to get any profit out of the transaction. I can see only one of the pigs, but the one I can see is not overburdened with fat, and it's again reason to expect that he will be long in getting out when he starts, or wait for you to scratch him when he breaks cover." "Don't you be afraid of them pigs getting away from me, old man," rejoined Bill, as he pried away at the nails. "I don't expect that the ones that start will be as slow as a funeral when he makes his first jump, but he won't be the only pig I've caught by the leg when he has 2 feet above the earth." "Go slow, I say, go slow!" cried the trapper, now thoroughly alarmed at the reckless precipitancy of his companion. "The pigs, as I can see, belong to a lively breed, and it is sheer foolishness to risk a whole winter's chopping." Not another word of warning did the old trapper utter, for suddenly the nails yielded, the board flew upward, and out of the box shot a pig. It is in the interest of accurate statement and everlasting proof of Wild Bill's alertness to affirm and record that the flying pig had taken only 2 jumps before his owner was atop of him, and both disappeared over the bank in a whirlwind of flying snow. Nor had the trapper been less dexterous, for no sooner had the sandy-colored streak shot through the hole made by the hatchet of the man who had sledded him 40 miles, that he might present him to the trapper as a contribution to the Christmas dinner, than the old man dropped himself onto the box, thereby effectually barring the exit of the other porcine sprinter. Get your gun, old trapper," yelled Bill from the whirlwind of snow. "Get your gun, I say, for this infernal pig is getting the best of me." "I can't do it, Bill," cried the trapper. "I can't do it. I am doing picket duty on the top of this box, with a big hole under me, and another pig under the hole." At the same instant the pig and Wild Bill shot up the bank into full view. Bill had lost his grip on the leg, but had made good his hold on an ear, and had the trapper been a betting man, it is doubtful if he would have placed money on either. Had he done so, the odds would have been slightly in favor of the pig. "Hold on to him, Bill," cried the trapper, laughing at the spectacle in front of him till the tears stood in his eyes. "Hold on to him, I say. Remember, you have 3 months of chopping in your grip, the pig under me getting lively, and the profits of the other 3 months beyond certain." "Oh, Lord!" ejaculated the old man, partially sobered at the prospect. "Here comes the pups, and the devil himself will now be to pay." The anxiety and alarming prediction of the trapper were in the next instant fully justified, for the 2 dogs, unaccustomed to the scent and cries of the animals, but thoroughly aroused at the noise and fury of the contest, came tearing down the slope through the snow at full speed. The pig saw them coming and headed for the southern angle of the cabin, with Bill streaming along at his side. In an instant he reappeared at the northern corner, with Bill still fastened to his ear, and the hounds in full cry, just 1 jump behind him. It is not an accurate statement to say that Wild Bill was running beside the pig, for his stride was so elongated that when one of his feet left the ground it was impossible to predict when or where it would strike the earth, or whether it would ever strike again. The two flying objects, as they came careering around the slope directly toward the trapper, who was heroically holding himself above the aperture in the box with the porcine volcano in full play under him, presented the dreadful appearance of Biela's comet, when, rent by some awful explosion, the one half was on the point of taking its eternal farewell of the other. "Lift the muzzle of your piece, Wild Bill!" yelled the trapper. "Lift the muzzle, I say, and allow 3 feet for windage, and you'll make me the bull's-eye for your pig." The advice, or rather let us say the expostulation of the trapper, was the best which under the circumstances could be given, but no directions, however correct, might prevent the dreadful catastrophe. The old man stuck heroically to his post, and the pig stuck with equal pertinacity to his course. He struck the box on which the trapper sat with the force of a stone from a catapult, and dogs, men, and pigs disappeared in the snow. When the trapper had wiped the snow from his eyes, the spectacle that he beheld was, to say the least, extraordinary. The head of one dog was in sight above the snow, and nigh the head he could make out the hind legs and tail of another. In one instant Wild Bill's cap came in sight, and from under it a series of sounds was coming, as if he were talking earnestly to himself, while far down the trail, leading to the river, he caught the glimpse of 2 sandy-colored objects going at a speed to which matter can only attain when it has become permanently detached from this earth and superior to the laws of gravitation. For several minutes not a word was said. The catastrophe had been so overwhelming, and the wreck of Bill's hopes so complete, that it made speech on his part impossible. The trapper, from a fine sense of feeling and regard for his companion, remained silent, and the dogs, uncertain as to what was expected of them, kept their places in the snow. At last the old man struggled to his feet and silently started towards the cabin. Wild Bill followed in equal silence, and the dogs as mutely brought up the rear. The depressed, not to say woebegone, appearance of the singular procession certainly had in it, in the fullest measure, all the elements of humor. In this suggestive manner the column filed into the cabin. The dogs stole softly to their accustomed places, Wild Bill dropped into a chair, and the trapper addressed himself mechanically to some domestic concerns. At last the silence became oppressive. Wild Bill turned in his chair, and facing the trapper, said, "It's too devilish bad." "If you was in council, generals or privates, you'd carry every boat with you on that statement, Bill," said the trapper with deliberation. "Do you think there's any chance, old man?" queried Bill earnestly. "Not on the earth, Bill," answered the trapper. "You see," he continued, "the snow wasn't so deep on my side of the trail, and I had my eye on them pigs afore you got your head above the drift, and I noted the rate of their moving. They was going mighty fast, Bill, mighty fast. You must take into account that they had the slope in their favor and sartain experiences behind. I've sighted on a good many things that was gifted in running and flying, and I never kept a bullet in the barrel when I wanted feather, fur, or meat, because of the swiftness of the motion. But if I had been standing 10 rods from that trail, and loved the meat like a settler, I wouldn't have wasted powder nor lead on them pigs, Bill." And the 2 men, looking into each other's faces, laughed like boys. "Where do you think they'll fetch up, John Norton?" queried Bill at last. "Oh, they won't fetch up," replied the trapper, wiping his eyes. "Leastwise, not this year. Henry has told me that it is 24,000 miles round the arth, and it looks to me as if them pigs got started out to circumnavigate it, and I can see it'll be about a month afore they will come through this clearing again. I may be a little amiss in my calculatin', but a day more or less won't make any difference with you and me, nor with the pigs either, Bill. They may be a trifle leaner when they pass the cabin next time, but the gait will be jest the same, as I can see." And after a moment he asked sympathetically, "How far did you sled them pigs, Bill?" 40 mile," answered Bill dejectedly. "It's a good distance, considerin' the nature of the animals," replied the trapper, "and you must have been tempted to unload the sled more'n once, Bill." "I would have unloaded it," responded the other. "I would have unloaded the cussed things more than once, but I had nothing else to bring you, and I thought they'd look mighty fine standing up on the table with an apple in each mouth and their tails curled up, as I seen 'em at the barbecues." "So they would, Bill, but you never could have kept 'em on the table. No amount of cooking would ever have taken the speed out of them pigs. If you had nailed 'em to the table, they'd have taken the table and cabin with 'em. It's better as it is, Bill, so cheer up and we'll get at the cooking." Cooking is more than an art, it is a gift. Genius, and genius alone, can prepare a feast fit for the feaster. Woe be to the wretch who sees nothing in preparing food for the mouth of man save manual labor. Such a knave should be basted on his own spit. An artist in eating can alone appreciate an artist in cooking. When food is well prepared, it delights the eye, it intoxicates the nose, it pleases the tongue, it stimulates the appetite, and prolongs the healthy craving which it finally satisfies, even as the song of the mother charms the child which it gradually composes for slumber. The old trapper was a man of gifts, and among his gifts was that of cooking. For 60 years he had been his own chef, with a continent for his larder, and to more than one gourmand of the great cities the tastiness and delicacy of his dishes had been a revelation. More than one epicure of the clubs had gone from his cabin not only with a full but a surprised stomach. It is easy to imagine the happiness that this host of the woods experienced in preparing the feast for the morrow. He entered upon his labors, whose culmination was to be the great event of the year, with the alacrity of one who had mentally discussed and decided every point in anticipation. There was no cause for haste, and hence there was no confusion. He could not foretell the number of his guests, but this did in no way disconcert him. He had already decided that no matter how many might come, there should be enough. In Wild Bill he had an able and willing assistant, and all through the afternoon and well into the evening the two men pushed on the preparation for the great dinner. The large table, constructed of strong maple plank, was sanded and scoured until it shone almost snowy white. On it was placed a buck, roasted à la barbecue, the skin and head skillfully reconnected with the body and posed, muzzle lifted, antlers laid well back, head turned, ears alert, as he stood in the bush when the trapper's bullet cut him down. At one end of the table a bear's cub was in the act of climbing a small tree, while at the other end a wild goose hung in mid-air, suspended by a fine wire from the ceiling, with neck extended, wings spread, legs streaming backward, as he looked when he drove downward toward open water to his last feeding. The great cabin was a bower of beauty and fragrance. The pungent odor of gummy boughs and of bark, under which still lurked the amber-colored sweat of heated days and sweltering nights, pervaded it. On one side of the cabin hung a huge piece of white cotton cloth, on which the trapper, with a vast outlay of patience, had stitched small cones of the pine into the conventional phrase, "A Merry Christmas to ye all." "It must have taken you a good many evenings to have done that job," said Wild Bill, pointing with the ladle he held in his hand toward the illuminated bit of sheeting. "It did, Bill, it did," replied the trapper, "and a solemn and a lively time I had of it, for I hadn't but 6 needles in the cabin, and I broke 5 of 'em the first night, for the cones was gummy and hard, and it takes a good stiff needle to go through one if the man who is punching it through hasn't any thimble and the ball of his thumb is bleeding. Lord a massy, Bill, Rover knew the trouble I was having as well as I did, for arter I had broken the second needle and talked about it a moment, the old dog got uneasy and began to edge away, and by the time I had broken the fourth needle and got through washing my thumb, he had backed clean across the cabin and sat jammed up in the corner out there flatter than a shingle. "And what did he do when the fifth needle broke?" queried Bill, as he thrust his ladle into the pot. "Heavens and earth, Bill, why do you ask such foolish questions? You know, it wasn't a minute arter that fifth needle broke, leavin' the bigger half stickin' under the nail of my forefinger, afore both of the pups was goin' out through the door there, as if the devil was arter 'em, with a fryin' pan and a chair a leetle behind him. But a man can't stand everything, if he be a Christian man and workin' away to get a Christmas sign ready, can he, Bill?" It is in harmony with the facts of the case for me to record that Wild Bill never answered the old trapper's very proper interrogation, but sat down on the floor and thrust his legs up in the air and yelled, and after the spasm left him he got up slowly, sat down in a chair, and looked at the trapper with wet eyes and mouth wide open. End of Part 9, Section 1. Part 9, Section 2 of A Christmas Miscellany, 2019, by various authors. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Part 9, Holiday Tales, Christmas in the Adirondacks, John Norton's Vagabond, by William Henry Harrison Murray, Section 2. The old trapper evidently relished the mirthfulness of his companion, for his face was lighted with the amused expression of the humorist when he has told to an appreciative comrade an experience against himself. But in an instant his countenance dropped, and, looking at the huge kettle that stood half buried in the coals and warm ashes in front of the glowing logs, and into which Bill had been so determinedly thrusting his ladle only a moment before, he exclaimed, "Bill, I've lost all confidence in your cooking abilities. You said that you knew the natur of corn meal, and that you could fill a pudding bag judiciously. And though it isn't 10 minutes since you tied the string, and the meal isn't half swollen yet, your whole bag there is on the point of coming out of the pot." At this alarming announcement, Wild Bill jumped for the fireplace, and in an instant he had placed the spade-shaped end of his ladle, whose handle was full 3 feet long, at the very centre of the lid that was already lifted 2 inches from the rim of the kettle, and was putting a good deal of pressure upon it. Confident in his ability to resist any further upward tendency, and to escape the threatened catastrophe, he coolly replied, "It strikes me that you are a good deal excited over a little matter, old man. The meal has got through swelling." No, it hasn't," returned the trapper. "Half the carnals haven't felt the warming of the hot water yet, and I can see that the old lid is lifting." "No, it isn't lifting either, John Norton," continued Wild Bill determinedly, "and it won't lift unless the shaft of this ladle snaps." "The ladle'll be a good 'un," returned the trapper, now fully assured that no human power could avert the coming catastrophe, and keenly enjoying his companion's extremity and the humour of the situation. "The ladle'll be a good 'un, for I fashioned it from an old paddle of second growth ash, whose blade I had twisted in the rapids, and you can put your whole weight on it." "Old man," cried Bill, now thoroughly alarmed, "the lid is lifting." "Sartinly," returned the trapper. "It's lifted fully half an inch since you placed your ladle to it, and it'll keep on lifting. Rover knows what is coming as well as I do, for our old dog, as you see, begins to edge away, and sport has started for the door already." "What shall I do, John Norton? What shall I do? The lid is lifting again." "Is your ladle well placed, Bill? Have you got it in the centre of the lid?" returned the trapper. "Dead in the centre, old man," responded Bill confidently, "dead in the centre." "Put your whole weight on it, then, and don't waste your strength in talking. You know your own strength, and I know the strength of Indian meal when hot water gets at it, and ef the ladle don't slip or the kettle lid split, it's about nip and tuck atween ye." "Old man," yelled Bill, as he put his whole weight on the ladle handle, "this lid has lifted again. Get a stick and come here and help me." "No, Bill," answered the trapper. "The puddin' is of your own mixin', and you must attend to the job yourself. I stuck to your box with a hole underneath me and a pig under the hole till something happened, and ye must stick to your puddin'." "But I can't hold it down, John Norton," yelled poor Bill. "The lid has lifted again, and the whole darned thing is comin' out of the pot." "I concede as much as I concede as much," answered the trapper. "There go the pups out of the door, Bill, and when the dogs quit the cabin, it's time for the master to foller." And the old man started for the door. The catastrophe! Who could describe it? Bill's strength was adequate, but no human power could save the pudding. Even as Bill put his strength onto the ladle, the wooden cover of the kettle split with a sharp concussion in the middle, the kettle was upset, and poor Bill, covered with ashes and pursued by a cloud of steam, shot out of the door and plunged into the snow. Oh, laughter, sweet laughter! Laugh on and laugh ever! In the smile of the babe thou comest from heaven. In the girl's rosy dimples, in the boy's noisy glee, in the humor of strong men, and the wit of sweet women, thou art seen as a joy and a comfort to us humans. When fortune deserts and friends fall away, he who keeps thee keeps solace and health, hope and heart in his bosom. When the head groweth white, and the eye getteth dim, and the soul goeth out through the slow closing gates of the senses, be thou then in us and of us, thou sweet angel of heaven, that the smile of the babe in its first happy sleep may come back to our faces as we lie at the gates in our last and perhaps most peaceful slumber. The laughter and the labor of the day were ended. The work of the preparation for the dinner on the morrow had extended well into the evening, and at its conclusion the two men, satisfied with the result of the pleasant task and healthily weary, retired to their cots. It is needless to say that the thoughts of each were happy and their feelings peaceful, and to such slumber comes quickly. Outside, the world was white and still, with the stillness that precedes the coming of a winter storm. Through the voiceless darkness, a few feathery prophecies of coming snow were settling lazily downward. The great stones in the fireplace were still white with heat, and the cabin was filled with the warm afterglow of burned logs and massive brands that ever and anon broke apart and flamed anew. Suddenly the trapper lifted himself on his couch, and, looking over toward his companion, said, "Bill, didn't you hear the bells ring?" Wild Bill lifted himself to his elbow, and, in sheer astonishment, stared at the trapper, for he well knew there wasn't a bell within 50 miles. The old man noticed the astonishment of his companion, and, realizing the incredibility of the supposition, said, as if in explanation of the strangeness of his questioning, "This be the night on which the memory takes the home trail, Bill, and the thoughts of the aged go backward." And, laying his head again on the pillow, he murmured, "I certainly conceded I heerd the bells ringin'." And then he slept. Ay, ay, old trapper, we of whitening heads know the truth of thy saying and thy dreaming. Thou didst hear the bells ring, for often as we sleep on Christmas Eve, the ringing of bells comes to us. Marriage peal and funeral knell, chimes and tolling, clash of summons and measured stroke, dying noises from a dead past, swelling and sinking, sinking and swelling, like falling and failing surf on a wreck-strewn beach. Ah me! Where be the ships, the proud white-sailed ships, the rich-laden ships, whose broken timbers and splintered spars lie, now dank and weed-grown, sand-covered, on that sorrowful shore, on that mournfully resounding shore of our past? But other bells, thank God, sound for us all, old trapper, on Christmas Eve. Not the bells of the past, but the bells of the future. And they ring loud and clear, and they will ring forever, for they are swung by the angels of God, and they tell of a new life, a new chance, and a new opportunity for us all. Morning dawned. The day verified the trapper's prophecy, for it came with storm. The mountain back of the cabin roared as if aerial surf was breaking against it. The air was thick with snow that streamed, whirled, and eddied through it dry and light as feathers of down. "Never mind the storm, Bill," said the trapper cheerily, as he pushed the door open in the gray dawn and looked out into the maze of whirling, rushing snowflakes. "A few may be hindered, and one or two fetched through a leetle late, but there'll be an earnest movement of teeth when the hour for eating comes, and the plates be well filled." Dinner was called prompt to the hour, and again was the old man's prediction realized. The table lacked not guests, for nearly every chair was occupied. 20 men had breasted the storm that they might be at that dinner, and some had traversed a 30-mile trail that they might honor the old man and share his generous cheer. It was a remarkable, and perhaps we may say, a motley company that the trapper looked upon as he took his place, knife and fork in hand, at the head of the table, with a hound on either side of his great chair, to perform the duty of host and chief carver. "Friends," said the trapper, standing erect in his place, and looking cheerfully at the row of bearded and expectant faces on either hand in front of him, "friends, I ask you to come and eat this Christmas dinner with me, because I love the companionship of the woods, and hated on this day of human feasting and gladness to eat my food alone. I also conceded that some of you felt as I did, and that the day would be happier if we spent it together. I knew, furthermore, that some of you were not born in the woods, but were newcomers, driven here as a canoe to a beach in a gale, and that the day might be long and lonesome if you had to stay in your cabins from morning till night, alone by yourselves. And I also conceded that here and there might be a man who had been unfortunate in his trappings or his ventures in the settlements, and might actually be in need of food and garments. Or it may be he had acted wickedly at times, and had lost confidence in his own goodness and the goodness of others. And I said, I will make the terms of the inviting broad enough to include each and all, whoever and whatever he may be. And now, friends," continued the old man, "I be glad to see you at my table, and I hope you've brought a good appetite with you, for the victuals be ready, and no one need scrimp the size of his eating. Let us all eat heartily and be merry, for this be Christmas. If you've had bad luck in the past, we'll hope for better luck in the future, and take heart. If we've been heavy-hearted or sorrowful, we will chirk up. If any have wronged us, we will forgive and forget. For this be Christmas, friends, and Christmas be a day for forgiving and forgetting. And now," continued the old man, as he flourished his knife and grasped the huge fork preparatory to plunging it into the venison haunch in front of him, "with good appetites and a cheerful mind, let us all fall to eating." 3. Thus went the feasting. Hunger had brought its appetite to the plentiful table, and the well-cooked viands provoked its indulgence. If the past of any of the trapper's guests had been sorrowful, the unhappiness of it, for the moment, was forgotten. Stories, crisp as snow-crust, and edged with aptness, happy memories, and reminiscences of frolic and fun, sly hits, and keen retorts, jokes and laughter, rollicked around the table and shook it with mirthful explosions. The merriment was at its height when a loud summons sounded upon the door. It was so imperious, as well as so unexpected, that every noise was instantly hushed, and every face at the table was turned in surprise to wait the entrance. "Come in," cried the trapper cheerily. "However you be, you'd be welcome if you be a little late." The response of him who so emphatically sought admission to the feast was as prompt as his summons had been determined. For without an instant's delay or the least hesitancy of movement, the great door was pushed suddenly inward, and a man stepped into the room. A sturdy fellow he was, swarth of skin and full whiskered. His hair was black and coarse and grown to his shoulders. His eyes were black as night, largely orbed under heavy brows, not lacking a certain wicked splendor. His face was strongly featured and stamped in every line and curve and prominence with the impress of unmistakable power. In his right hand he carried a rifle, and in his left a bundle snugly packed and protected from the storm in wrappings of oiled cloth. The strong light, into the circle of which he had so suddenly stepped, blinded him for a moment, while to those who sat staring at him it brought out with vivid distinctiveness every feature of his strong and, save for a certain hardness of expression, handsome face. It was evident that the man, whoever he was, and whatever he might be, was under the pressure of some impulse or conviction which had urged him on to the trapper's cabin and the trapper's presence. For no sooner had he closed the door and shaken the snow, with which he was covered, from his garments, than, regardless of those who sat staring in startled interrogation at him, he strode to the head of the table where the old trapper sat, and, looking him straight in the face, said, "Do you know who I am, John Norton?" "Sartinly," answered the trapper. "You be Shanty Jim, and you've camped these 3 year and more at the outlet of Bog Lake." "Do you know that I am a thief, and a sneak thief at that?" continued the newcomer, speaking with a fierce directness that was startling. "I've conceded you was," answered the trapper calmly. "Do you know it? Know it to a certainty?" And the words came out of his mouth like the thrust of a knife. "Yes, I know that you be a thief, Shanty Jim," replied the trapper. "Know it to a sartinty." "Do you know that I have stolen skins from you, old man, skins and traps both?" continued the other. "I laid an ambush for you once at the falls of Bog River, and I seed you take an otter from a trap that I sought," replied the trapper. "Why didn't you shoot me when I stood skin in hand?" queried the self-confessed thief. "I can't tell," answered the trapper, "for my eye was at the sights and my finger on the trigger, and the feeling of natur was strong within me to crop one of your ears then and there, Shanty Jim, but something, mayhap the Spirit of the Lord, stayed my finger, and you went with your thieving in your hand to your camp untouched and unhindered. Do you know what brought me to this cabin and to your presence, the presence of the man whose skins and whose traps I have stolen, and made me confess to his face and before these men here that I am a thief and a scoundrel? Do you know what brought me here, a miserable cuss that I am and have been for years, John Norton?" And the man's speech was the speech of one who had been educated to use words rightly, and was marked with intense, even dramatic, earnestness. "I can't conceive unless the Spirit of the Lord—" "The Spirit of the Lord had nothing to do with it," interrupted the other fiercely. "If there is any influence at work in this world, as the preachers tell of, why has it not prevented me from being a thief? Why did it not prevent me from doing what I did and being what I was in my youth? Me, whose mother was an angel and whose father was a patriarch. No, it was nothing under God's heaven, old man, but your invitation, scrawled with a coal on a bit of birch bark, inviting anyone in these woods who needed victuals and clothes and a right spirit to come to your cabin on Christmas Day. And had you written nothing else, I would not have cared a cuss for it or for you, but you did write something else, and it was this: vagabonds included in this invite. When I read that, old man, my breath left me, and I stood and stared at the letters on that bark as a devil might gaze at a pardon signed with the seal manual of the Almighty, for in my hand was a trap that bore the stamp J.N., and the skin of an otter I'd taken from the trap. And there I stood, a thief and a scoundrel, with your property in my hands, and read your invitation to all the needy in the woods to come to your cabin on Christmas Day, and that vagabonds were included." "Well, that meant you, by thunder!" exclaimed Wild Bill. "Yes, it did mean me," returned Shanty Jim, "and I knew it. Standing there in the snow with the stolen skin and trap in my hand, I realized what I was and what John Norton was, and the difference between him and myself and most of the world. I went to the tree to which the bark that bore the blessed letters was nailed. I took it down from the tree, I placed it next my bosom, and buttoned my coat above it, and thus, resting upon my heart, I bore it to my shanty." "It was as good as a Bible to you," said Wild Bill. "A Bible," rejoined the man with emphasis, "better than all Bibles, better than churches and preachers, better than formal texts and utterances, for that bit of bark told me of a man here in the woods, good enough and big enough to forgive and forget. All that night I sat and gazed at that piece of bark and the writing on it, and as I gazed my heart melted within me, for there it was, ever before my eyes, vagabonds included in this invite. Vagabonds included in this invite. And finally the words passed into the air, and wherever I looked I saw vagabonds included in this invite." "Yes, them be the very words I writ," said the trapper gravely. "And I saw more than the words written on the bark, John Norton," resumed the man. "For looking at it, I saw all my past life, and the evil of it, and what a scoundrel I had become. My eyes saw with a new sight, and I said, 'When the sun comes up, I will rise and go to the man who wrote those words and tell him what they did for me.' And here I am, a vagabond who has accepted your invitation to spend Christmas with you, and here in this pack are the skins and the traps I have stolen from you, and I ask your forgiveness, and that you will take my hand in proof of it, that I may come to your table feeling that I am a man and a vagabond no longer." "Heart and hand be yours now and forever, Shanty Jim," cried Trapper joyfully, and rising from his chair he met the outstretched hand of the repentant vagabond with his own hearty grasp. "And may the Lord be with you forevermore." "Amen." It was Wild Bill, the once drunkard, who said the sweet word of prayer and assent, and he said it softly. And that murmur of Amen and Amen went around the great table like the murmur of prayer and of praise. And then it passed out and rose up from the cabin, and the air in its joy passed it on, and the stars took it up and thrilled it around their vast courses of glorified light. And through the high heavens it sang itself onward from order to order of angels, until it reached him whom no man hath seen or may ever see, in all and over all, God blessed forever. Has nature knowledge? Is she conscious of the evil and the good among men? And has she a heart that saddens at their sorrow and rejoices in their joy? Perhaps. For suddenly, even as the two men joined their hands, the fury of the storm checked itself, and a stillness, the stillness of a great calm, fell on the woods, and through the sudden, the unexpected, the blessed stillness, to the ears of one of the two men, yea, to him who had forgiven, there came the melody of bells swinging slowly and softly to and fro. Oh, bells, invisible bells! Bells of the soul, bells high in heaven, swing softly, swing low, swing sweet, and swing ever for us, one and all, when we at our tables sit feasting. Swing for us living, swing for us dying, and may the cause of your swinging be our forgiving and forgetting. "John Norton," said the man, "you have called me Shanty Jim, and that is well, for in the woods here that is my name. But in the city where I lived, and whence I fled because of my misdeeds, years ago, I have another name, a name of power and wealth and honor for more than 2 centuries. There I have a home, and in that home tonight sits my aged father and white-haired mother. I am going back to them, clothed and in my right mind. Think of it, old trapper, going back to my home, my boyhood home, to my father and my mother. All day as I tramped on the trail toward your cabin, my mind has been filled with memories of the past, and the words of a sweet old song I used to sing when too young to feel the tenderness of it have been ringing in my ears." "Sing us the song! Sing us the song!" cried Wild Bill, and every man at the table cried with him, "Sing us the song!" "Ay, ay," assented the trapper. "Sing us the song, Shanty Jim. We be men of the woods at this table, and some of us had losses and sorrers, and all of us have memories of happy days that be gone. Stand here by my side and sing us the song that has been ringing in your ears all day. This is a table of feastin', and feastin' means more than eatin'. Sing us the song that tells you of the past, of your boyhood days, and father and mother." Oh, the secrets of the woods! How many have fled to them for concealment and refuge! In them piety has built its retreat, learning has sought retirement, broken pride a mask, and misfortune a haven. And in response to the trapper's invitation, there had come to his cabin and were now grouped about his table more of ability, more of knowledge, more of struggle and failure, and more of reminiscence than might be found, perhaps, in the same number of guests at any other table on that Christmas day in the world. Never did singer sing sweeter or more touching song, or to more receptive company. Backward, turn backward, O time in your flight, make me a child again, just for tonight. Mother, come back from the echoless shore, take me again to your heart as of yore. Kiss from my forehead the furrows of care, smooth the few silver threads out of my hair. Over my slumbers your loving watch keep, rock me to sleep, mother, rock me to sleep. Chorus. Clasped to your heart in a loving embrace, with your light lashes just sweeping my face, never hereafter to wake or to weep, rock me to sleep, mother, rock me to sleep. Over my heart, in the days that are flown, no love like mother love ever has shone. No other worship abides and endures, faithful, unselfish, and patient, like yours. None like a mother can charm away pain from the sick soul and the world-weary brain. Slumber's soft calms o'er my heavy lids creep. Rock me to sleep, mother, rock me to sleep. Chorus. Come, let your brown hair, just lighted with gold, fall on your shoulders again as of old. Let it drop over my forehead tonight, shading my faint eyes away from the light. For with its sunny-edged shadows once more, haply will throng the sweet visions of yore. Lovingly, softly, its bright billows sweep. Rock me to sleep, mother, rock me to sleep. Chorus. Never was the sweet and touching song sung under more suggestive circumstances, and never was it received into more receptive hearts. The voice of the repentant vagabond was of the finest quality, a pure, resonant tenor, and through the splendid avenue of expression which the words and music of the song made for his emotions, he poured his soul forth without restraint. The effect of his effort was what would be expected when the character of the audience and the occasion is considered. Many an eye was wet with tears, and the voices that took up the refrain here and there trembled with emotion. The old trapper himself was not unmoved, for as the song closed, after a few moments of silence, he said, "You sang the song well, Shanty Jim, and many be the memories it has stirred in the breast of us all. May your homecoming be as happy as was the boys we read of in the Scripture, although I never could conceit why the mother was not there to go forth to meet him, and fall on his neck with the father, and if I had the writing of it, I'd had the mother get him a ladle first, and hers the first arms that was thrown around his neck, for that would be more nat'ral, as I conceit, and I certainly trust, as do all of us here, that you will find mother and father both waiting and watching for you when the curve of the trail brings you in the sight of the cabin, and you certainly will take with you the good wishes of us all. Come, take the chair here by my side, and we will all talk as we eat, ay, and sing too, for this be Christmas, and Christmas be the time for eating and singing, but above all for forgiving and forgetting." At the word, the happy feasters went on with the feasting. Long and merry was the meal. As the hours passed, the eating ceased, and the feast of reason and the flow of soul began. Memories of other days were recalled, confessions made, sorrow for misdoings felt and spoken, and gradually growing, as grows the light of dawn, a fine atmosphere of hope, charity, and courage spread from heart to heart, until at last it filled with its genial and illuminating presence every bosom. In such a mood, on the part of the host and guests alike, the feast came to its close. His Christmas dinner had been all that the old trapper had hoped, and his heart was filled with happiness. He rose from his chair, and standing erect in his place, said, "You tell me that the time has come for you to go, and I dare say you be right, but I be sorry we must part, for in parting we be never sure of a meeting, and therefore, as I conceit, all the partings on the earth be more or less sad, but all parted trails, it may be, will come together in the end. But before you go, I want to thank you for coming, and I hope you will all come again, and whenever your needs or your feelings incline you this way. One thing I want to say to you in going, and I want you to take it away with you, for it may help some of you to aid some unfortunate man and to feel as happy as I feel tonight. It is this," and here the old man paused a moment and looked with the face of an angel at his guests as they stood gazing at him, and then he impressively said, "I've lived nigh on to 80 year, and my head be whitening with the coming and going of the years I've lived. And the book has long been in my cabin. I've kept many a Christmas alone and in company, both, but never before have I knowed the raal meaning of the day, nor read the lesson of it right. And this be the lesson that I've learned, and the one I want you all to take away with you as you go, that Christmas is a day of feasting and giving and laughing, but above everything else it is a day for forgiving and forgetting. Some of you be young, and may your days be long on the earth, and some of your heads be as white as mine, and your years be not many, but be that as it may, whether our Christmas days be many or few, when the right day comes round, let us remember in good or ill fortune, alone or with many, that Christmas, above all else, is the day for forgiving and forgetting." The guests were gone, and the trapper seated himself in front of the fireplace and called the 2 dogs to his side. It was a signal that they had heard many times, and they responded with happy hearts. Each rested his muzzle on the trapper's knee, and fixed his large, hazel, love-lighted eyes wistfully on his master's face. The old man placed a large and age-wrinkled hands on either head, and murmured, "Whether you be in sorrow or joy, friends come and go, but until death enters kennel or cabin, the hunter and his hounds bide together. The lad camps beyond sight and beyond hearing. Henry be on the other side of the world tonight, and guests be gone. Rover, your muzzle be as gray as my head, and few be living of the many we have met on the trail." And the trapper lifted his eyes and looked around the large and empty room, and then added, "It took me good many years, yes, it sartinly took me a good many years, but if I've larned the lesson of Christmas a leetle late, I've learned it at last. But the cabin does look a leetle empty now that the guests be gone. No, the lad can never come back, and Henry is on the other side of the world, and there's no good in longing. But I do wish I could just touch the boy's hand. Friends come and go, but until death enters kennel or cabin, the hunter and his hounds bide together." Ah, friends, dear friends, as years go on and heads get gray, how fast the guests do go. Touch hands with those that stay. Strong hands to weak, old hands to young, around the Christmas board. Touch hands. The faults forget. The foe forgive. For every guest will go, and every fire burn low, and cabin empty stand. Forget, forgive, for who may say that Christmas Day may ever come to host or guest again? Touch hands. End of Part 9, Section 2. End of A Christmas Miscellany 2019 by various authors.